Right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Andrew Jones, and I am hosting this afternoon's webinar from DBL, held in conjunction with Mastergen and the Farm Consultancy Group. First of a number of items we're referring to as Dairying Around the World. Our first speaker today is Neil Greggor, who is the Herd Development Manager from Mastergen. Who is going to speak to us about his time in South Africa. A little bit of housekeeping first of all. There should be the opportunity to send any questions via the question and answer box. Please feel free to send them during the presentation. But we will obviously deal with them all at the end once Neil has spoken. Other than that, I don't think there's anything else other than to hand you over to Neil. And take it from there. So welcome, Neil. The floor is now yours.
Thank you, Andrew. Good afternoon, everybody, and very much welcome to our first webinar. As Andrew said, I'm Neil Greggor. I work for Mastergen, and I'm responsible for developing services and genetic solutions for Mastergen customers. To start with, I started my career in 1988 as a Holstein Friesian or Friesland classifier in South Africa. I became involved in the genetic industry quite soon and traveled to various countries all over Africa, as well as all over Europe and America and Asia. I still have a lot of family and friends in South Africa, but my family and I moved to the UK about 12 years ago. The idea of these webinar started with Alison Dunphy, Mastergen's CEO, who suggested that I speak to Andrew Jones of DBL and set up webinars that are not only informative, but a little bit different and fun. Mark Yearsley from the Farm Consultancy Group immediately joined our venture, and today I'm privileged to be the first person to present a webinar on agriculture in South Africa, with slightly more emphasis on the dairy industry. My field is obviously more genetics, but because I've traveled so extensively, I've picked up quite a lot of ideas and views on different sort of agriculture practices. So I hope you enjoy the presentation, and you're very welcome to ask questions after my talk. I'll try my very best to answer the questions. Just to start, I just wanted to explain where South Africa's agriculture sort of sits in South Africa and what it actually means. Contribution to the GDP is about 3%, so it's certainly a player in the game, but it's also far more important than just that 3%. I tend to always have ecotourism and wildlife farming and farming all sort of into one pocket, because a lot of what game farms and parks actually came from farms that were not sustainable. We couldn't actually carry on with normal agricultural production, so they actually were turned into nature reserves or into hunting lodges or into ecotourism places. So this is all sort of jumped together. If I look at the employment that we're getting out of it, ecotourism accounts for about 1 million people, farming for about 638,000, and the associated is even more impressive. The ecotourism, about 2.6 million people are involved in that, and associated to farming in South Africa is about 8.5 million. So it is seriously significant in the whole scheme of things. One of the things that we must understand about also the employment is that a lot of the people that work on farms live on the farms with their families. And at one stage I saw figures, it wasn't just that 20% of people were working in agriculture, but about 35% of them were actually living on farms. But these were figures that I got a few years ago. But still to this day, it's definitely basically people living on farms or working on farms. One of the things that we saw a few years ago is that in 2009, we had 49 million people in South Africa. Now at 2020, it's estimated at about 60 million. And the UK is estimated at about 67 million, just to give a comparison. By the year 2035, we'll be looking at over 80 million in South Africa and about 71 million in the UK. Why this is significant is that as the population grows, we're going to have to produce far, far more food. From 2009 to 2035, South Africa will practically have to double their food production. to maintain what they're looking at. So this is absolutely vitally important for the whole of world agriculture, because the rest of the world will be following suit, and more and more and more people will be needed to be fed. One of the things I'm extremely proud of is that I've been involved in this agriculture all of my life, and I think it's an incredible industry to have been involved in. And the role that we play is far, far, far more than just farming or just working in the industry or helping people. So to start with that, let's have a look at some of the statistics that I've pulled together for South Africa. Cattle numbers in South Africa, about 13.5 million, as where we are in the UK at about 9.5 million. The average rainfall in millimeters, this is just an average, is 885 in the UK, 464 in South Africa, and globally 786. But as we all know, those figures don't really mean much because they'll practically change every day. The point I'm trying to make is that South Africa has half as much rainfall as what we would get in the UK. It's one of the reasons I've always maintained that the UK is one of the best places I've ever seen for dairy production. And this rainfall, grass that grows for nothing, is absolutely incredibly important. And during my travel, when I see how difficult it is to farm and how difficult droughts are and water and growing crops, it's seriously quite easy to work out why I say that. Then size-wise, in square miles, UK is 93,630 square miles, and South Africa is 471,000. It's an amazing difference in size. So it's quite incredible that in the UK, we still manage to have so many more cattle, so many cattle and so many more dairy cattle than we do in South Africa. Just to start the talk on South Africa, what I always do is this is a very brief and explanation of what happens in South Africa and where everything happens. So if you start at the top of the map at Limpopo, right at the top is where we have the world famous nature reserve, the Kruger National Game Park. And up in that area, we call it the Bushveld. There's a lot of game farms, hunting lodges, and a lot of beef farming. But as we sort of move a little bit down, there's a lot of citrus, there's a lot of vegetables grown, a lot of cotton grown. In this area, we used to have a lot of tobacco very many years gone by, but it's basically quite a diverse area, as is the rest of the country. As you move slightly south, you get to KwaZulu-Natal. And again, this is an area that has huge diversity. In the sort of the top end where it's a lot more tropical, we have bananas, we have other kinds of fruit like avocado, pears, and all of the kind of crops that you would find in that area, like mangoes, lychees, etc. So it's quite an incredible place. The other fruit that's grown there is pineapples. As you move down to where that Pietermaritzburg is, that's where we start getting into the dairy area. And most of that is actually grassland, and most of it is natural or planted pastures. The natural pasture is more sort of specific for beef cattle and small stock, but the planted pastures for the dairy industry. In the Free State, which is sort of in the middle of the country and up to Gauteng and Northwest, that's where we have the maize belt, and this is where most of our maize is produced. Also our winter crops, like wheat and barley and oats and etc. Then when we move down to the Eastern Cape, the Eastern Cape is where I was born and bred and is an extremely important dairy area. But the Eastern Cape is also diverse and it's got some very, very arid areas that are really only good for small stock and more hardy kind of small stock. Then as we move down to the Western Cape, just before we get to the Western Cape is an area just between the Eastern Cape and Western Cape called the Southern Cape. Southern Cape has the highest number of Jersey cattle and absolutely passionate Jersey breeders. It's a lovely area if you want to go and speak to Jersey people. In that area, we've also got huge wheat fields. So it's a beautiful area to drive through when the wheat is in the fields. It's a really ugly area to drive through when the wheat isn't in the field. It really is barren. When we get down to Cape Town, that's obviously where the wine industry is, and that's where we get a lot of vineyards. Very, very beautiful area. It's actually where I started my career many years ago, 33 odd years ago. We also have a lot of large herds, dairy herds in that area. There's also beef cattle, but there's a few very, very big dairy herds. In the country, we only have about 2% of the herds that are over 700 cattle in milk. And in this area, that you get quite a few of those herds, the bigger dairy herds. As you move up the coast, going back up north, you go through the area which is called Namakwa land. And we have Namakwa land daisies, and this is an incredible tourist attraction, obviously in September, because that's when their spring is, and really lovely area to go through. Red bush tea that you can buy in the supermarkets in the UK almost exclusively comes from this area. And I would almost say exclusive, it's not almost, but that's where they actually grow it. It's grown off a bush. It's absolutely fantastic. Then as you go up to Northern Cape is extremely arid area. And when you go up to the top, that's where our deserts are. On the far top corner is basically just a picture of kikuyu grass in a pasture that I took many years back. In the middle is the bushveld, which you'd find right at the top. You'd also find those forestries up in the far northern parts. And then, of course, in that Southern Cape area that I was, and up higher into Northern Cape, you'd find those deserts. You'd also find those very, very arid areas where those ostriches are. And then, of course, our beautiful wheatlands and our beautiful vineyards. So farming in South Africa. Only 12% of agriculture land is suitable for the production of rain-fed crops. 69% is suitable for livestock farming and is by far the largest agriculture sector. Livestock farming in South Africa is an absolute passion, and everybody loves having animals in the rural areas. And farming sizes and animal numbers differ between 2 cows and a goat to over 1,000 cows in the feedlot. So it is an absolute passion of people in South Africa to own animals. 2.9 tons of beef, pork, and poultry are consumed yearly. So it is still a meat-eating country. Farming in South Africa is extremely diverse. It ranges from subsistence farming to large feedlots. They're tiny little traditional farms where people basically probably go together and join together when they sell animals or when they're selling crops, so that it makes it a little bit worthwhile. But subsistence farming has become more and more difficult as sort of populations increase, and also when people move back towards the cities and aren't there to do the work. Small stock farming in South Africa. In the top left-hand corner is our Angora goats. The mohair was extremely popular at one point, and a lot of farmers made a lot of money out of mohair. Unfortunately, like everything, it dropped back quite a lot, and this became a lot less profitable as years went by. But it's still actually a very good animal to have in the more arid areas, and is still farmed extensively in South Africa. The next photo I've got is of a Zulu sheep. There's quite a few indigenous sheep breeds in South Africa that we've sort of like bred that have been there forever and have just basically been changed and bred to be more commercially viable. But the biggest sheep breed we have there is Merinos. Merinos obviously produce wool as well as mutton. This photo is taken on my father-in-law's farm when he was still farming with small stock. The bottom photo is the good old Boer goat. Boer goat is also an animal that can put up with any kind of conditions. It would basically eat paper and still get fat. It's really, really good breed for arid areas. It's also a scrounger. It will find food everywhere. I've never seen a fence that can keep a Boer goat at home. We have lots of other sheep breeds and lots of European breeds. We have mutton merinos, we have dorpers, we have caracals. A lot of the small stock is used in the more arid areas where it's almost impossible to farm with anything else. On beef farming, we have at least 40 different breeds of beef cattle. But to me, that's almost a joke, because I'm sure that there's more than that. In all of my experience in South Africa, everybody's got their own idea of what beef breed they want and what they want to breed. So there's quite a few hybrids that we've sort of bred over the years. This guy standing in the middle is a Bonsmara, and he's a hybrid of an Afrikaner, which is the one with the big horns, and it was used onto either Herefords or onto beef shorthorns. This is a really, really popular beef breed and absolutely smashing. I knew the person who actually developed the breed was Dr. Bornsmara, and I knew his family in KwaZulu-Natal. Excellent breeders of cattle. And of course, we have Nguni, which is indigenous. We have quite a few indigenous breeds, but this is one of the best and the most beautiful animals, beautiful pelts, and a really, really hardy animal. The stories go back, obviously, to when there were still lions around, which is not really the case nowadays. But the Nguni cow would fight off a lion to protect her calf. So they're really hardy, tough cows. Then, of course, we have Brahmins, and we have Anguses, and we have Limousines, and we have Charolais, and we have the whole works. And then we cross them as well. So, for example, we used the Brahmin onto Angus, which made a Brangus, which is also an exceptionally good breed. We've crossed with the Charolais and the Simmentalas and everybody. So we sort of reinvent the wheel the whole time. Maize is grown using natural rainfall, and maize is grown under pivots and under other kinds of irrigation. And the reason is that we harvest about 10 to 12 million tons of maize yearly. 4.1 million tons is for human consumption. And in South Africa, a large part of the population subsistence diet is a kind of a maize porridge, which is made. And so it is absolutely vitally important that we produce this. When the 10 to 12 million tons obviously is far more than 4.1. So we would use a lot of maize for silage, for feeding cattle, and obviously maize meal for feeding cattle. South Africa will also export maize, but they also import quite a lot. And obviously this is decided and judged by the season. So if we have a really bad season with lots of drought, they'll have to import. If it's a really good season, they have to export. More grain crops like sorghum. Sorghum is used a lot for beer. It's very popular and a very easy to plant. Nice amount of roughage if you are feeding it to cattle as well. We've got sunflower oil produced from sunflower seed. We've got sunflower seed that we export. So it's another one of the better products. Wheat, obviously, barley, oats, and just about anything you can think of. We also do soybeans in certain areas. Right, now onto one of my favorites is ecotourism and game farming. And ecotourism and game farming is a very, very big player in the industry. As I explained earlier, a lot of these game farms were taken from areas that was almost impossible to farm on. And where I grew up, there was a lot of people that were dairy farming that were just not sustainable. They just couldn't get enough food for the animals. They couldn't produce food. It was too dry. It's really was not made for dairy farming. And this is where these wildlife farms and hunting lodges and reserves came in. This lovely photo that I've got here is basically speaking about Pilanesberg is one of the privately owned game reserves that has done a huge amount for tourism near Sun City, and a lot of people go there. On the other side is we have quite a few lion parks and places like that. The chap holding the lion is myself when I was a lot younger, and the chap standing next to me is my little brother. This lion park was fairly close to where we lived in Port Elizabeth, and my mother and my brother who used to go there to help them feed the orphaned cubs or look after the cheetahs, and did a lot of work for these places. That my brother was actually, in retrospect, more the expert. I was sort of traveling around at that stage, so I wasn't really at home. But it was quite difficult to make these places pay. It was expensive to run, and they did sell venison to make money out of it. But these were more totally reliant on your tourist trade. So are the other nature reserves. One of my favorite pictures, this was taken by my wife, Colleen, when we were visiting in Oudtshoorn area. And South Africa's health and safety could probably be worked on when you look at this, but this is absolutely one of my favorite photos. But my favorite part of this photo is the chap hanging onto the tail with a stick in his hand. I've always wondered what his exact role is and what he was meant to be doing. But this is the kind of tourist attraction that you would find where guys have these beautiful farms with animals, that rescue animals or animals that they look after. And as you can see, that white tiger is in exceptionally good condition and enjoying his life. He'd obviously been there from a very small cub. Otherwise, I presume you wouldn't be able to treat him like that. The SA hunting industry said that in 2012, that they generated about 7.7 billion. And this is also from hunting and venison sector. The venison sector, those of you that know South Africans will know, it's more actually to do with the biltong part of it. But this is a very important part of it. And the SA hunting industry have told us that they are the biggest contributors to the nature, to look after the nature, to uphold it, to keep it going. And conservation is very, very much on their minds, and they pay a lot of money into it. Actually, they're the largest payers into that sector. So it is a very important part of the ecology. 60% of wildlife themselves is actually privately owned in South Africa. So that just shows you what percentage of people on hunting lodges and on private game farms and game parks it brings to the economy. Then always have to mention the old ostrich. I love an ostrich. And the ostrich was first developed more for accessories like feathers and for his hide. But then unfortunately, as we all know, the market changes and the fashion changes, and that ended up with them, the hugely prominent and very rich industry actually crashing out. A lot of the farmers went bankrupt, and a lot of them left the areas where these ostriches were. But these ostriches were in very, very arid areas. Ostrich chicks are very, very hard to raise. And my brother-in-law tried it in the middle of the country, and I remember it. It's an absolute nightmare. So they really, really prefer this arid, dry area, and that's where they actually do the best. So the old ostrich managed to survive. And basically, it became into fun farms where people can go to these ostrich farms. You can ride on an ostrich, you can race an ostrich. It's absolutely brilliant. And they are still used for their feathers, and then they are also used for meat. It's a really good meat. It's sort of between meat and venison, but it's a very, very lean and healthy meat, which is highly recommended and very delicious. Also, obviously, ostriches produce eggs. The eggs are not really commercially marketed. It's, as I said to you, it's so difficult to raise the chicks that every egg they can get, they want to use. Then, of course, the crocodile farming is another one. Again, in the area where I lived and grew up, there were a lot of people there that just couldn't sustain dairy farms or any other kind of farming. It was just not working out. It was too dry. They weren't getting enough rain. It was just impossible. And a lot of them went into this kind of between ecotourism and farming with crocodiles, where people would come in and listen to talks about crocodiles and look at them. And really, it started out bed and breakfasts and sort of holiday farms. So crocodiles are used, obviously, for their hides, which are turned into accessories and shoes and things like that. But also, there is a meat value to them, and meat is sold in South Africa. I personally have never eaten crocodile, but I believe people say, well, it tastes like chicken. The fruit market reports 4.7 million tons of fruit is produced in South Africa. 60% of that is exported. We all know when you go into Sainsbury's that we are buying especially citrus from South Africa. 28% is used for processing, 12% is used locally. And citrus is obviously the highest produced in South Africa, and that it ranges quite a lot across the whole country where you can produce citrus, and that's 58%. Pork and poultry, 60% of meat consumed in South Africa is chicken. This industry varies from people that have got 2 pigs to people that have got 1,000 pigs. There's big units, there's small units. It's really all over the show with this. And the same with chickens. Chickens you can find in all kinds of variations, in housing, in proper almost factory farming, to a guy with 2 chickens in his backyard. So it's again something that's fairly big in South Africa. Just a brief to export story to name a few of the agricultural products that we export: citrus, fruit, apples, pears, avocados, other deciduous fruit, maize, wheat, cane sugar. cane sugar is produced mainly in that KwaZulu-Natal area. Sunflower seeds, wool, mohair, wine, of course, from the Western Cape, and some in that Northern Cape, cotton and vegetables. 10% of all earnings from exports are from agriculture. So we do play a fairly big role in the exportations. And I always say that it's never mind the revenue it brings in, but the amount of jobs that you're creating is incredible. The biggest markets are mainly the rest of Africa and Europe. Asia is starting to play a larger role. Dairy farming in South Africa. I took this photo in sort of like in the late 1980s. My wife sitting at the back. We were in Mariesburg in the Western Cape, and I was a young classifier, and this is one of my first sort of shows that I'd been to and judged at. Dairy industry has all of the dairy breeds you can think of. We have dairy shorthorn, we have Holstein, and that's my daughter talking to the calf, to our Holstein calf. We have Guernseys, Jerseys, Brown Swiss, which we actually call Brown Swiss Dairy Swiss, mainly because that was really what they were brought in for, because there was beef and dairy Swiss. We have Ayrshires, and then of course we now have crossbred cattle, which has obviously come into the industry when farmers are trying to find ways to make more sustainable and to improve and increase the herd sizes. Number of dairy cattle and cows, just to give you an indication of where we stand as according to each country. UK is 2.6 million dairy cattle, which is 1.8 million cows, milking cows. South Africa is 1.3 million and 650,000 ton milk. The daily milk yield is 29 for Holstein, 22 for Ayrshires, and 19 for Jerseys. I always say to people, those figures don't actually mean huge amounts to me, because there's huge amounts of variance in the kind of conditions and the systems that we milk cows under in South Africa. Holsteins and the Jerseys and the Ayrshires, to be fair, come from a wide variety of genetics. We started off in South Africa with Dutch Frieslands, which is really where the sort of the nucleus of the South African black and white breed came from. We've also used Friesians. We had a very good relationship with importing and exporting backwards and forwards from the UK very many years ago. I saw a certificate from 1925 when we'd actually exported a bull from South Africa and to England. I also showed a story about a bull that landed in Port Elizabeth and had to walk all the way to Bloemfontein, which is about 500 miles. Can't understand why they couldn't find any other way to get him there, but I suppose that's just what happened. So it's definitely a breed that was bred for a little bit more strength and capacity in those days. We have changed the genetics when we went towards Holsteins with Canadian, American, English, British, and European genetics. We've also used Australian genetics. We've also used genetics from New Zealand. So pretty much from all over the world. And the genetic standard is pretty high and pretty good in the country. As I was saying, the conditions that cattle are milked under in South Africa vary dramatically. This first picture is in sort of a cookhouse area where they do a lot of, it's a very arid area where a lot of irrigation is done. It's done off a few rivers, the Fish River and the Orange River, and it's basically either flood irrigation and some center pivot. But basically these cows would walk down to the pasture and then they'd walk back again. The average heat there during the summer would be over 40 degrees. So it is frightfully hot for them. So you can imagine how much stress and pressure is put on these cows. Then the Ayrshire standing at the dirt yard. This is another dirt camp that we would have in the Western Cape in certain areas where the cattle would be outside, and they would basically have a screen for shade in the summer months. It gets a little bit muddy and wet in the winter, but as I said, the rainfall's not that high, so it's not really that much of a problem. Then we have the beautiful pastures. You can see where those Jerseys and crossbreds and Holsteins are. It's beautiful pastures of KwaZulu-Natal, where the main grass sort is Kikuyu. backed up by ryegrass and red and white clover. Then we have in the Western Cape, which I spoke about, we have more complete feed where animals remain inside all day. The herd that you're looking at now is a herd that I started out on when I was a Holstein classifier and had a lot to do with them, and is in my mind one of the best herds in the country. I thoroughly enjoyed having the opportunity to work with them in the old days. As I said, we have got complete feed systems with mixer wagons with huge amounts of silage and a lot of hay, and lucerne hay is one of the most commonly used hays in dairy farming. It gives you huge amounts of milk production. It's an excellent product with extremely high protein. It is also a legume with an incredible root system. It's really, really deep. Then we have kikuyu. Kikuyu is a plant that runs, a grass that runs, and we have it in KwaZulu-Natal in the Eastern Cape. It pretty much grows like weed, except it tends to go off in winter. So guys tend to oversow either red or white clover or even ryegrass into it, and that's one of the ways they feed it. KwaZulu-Natal tends to die back considerably because their winters are a little bit more severe than in the Eastern Cape where I came from. So in the Eastern Cape, sometimes they even have to spray it to get it to just back down a bit so that we can put in something like ryegrass that grows so much faster during the winter months. Ryegrass, it's Italian and perennial ryegrass that they grow. It's a little bit heavy on the soil, so it's always very good to have a legume like white or red clover growing at the same time, so we can at least keep the nitrogen levels higher in the soil. 40% of milk goes to cheese production. 98% of milk is sold to formal markets. In the old days, that would probably not have quite been the same, where a lot of milk would have been probably produced by individuals when there were a lot smaller herds. Percentage products likely to be found in people's homes in South Africa. 48% of the homes would have pasteurized milk. 40% would have UHT. UHT works very well in places where refrigeration is complicated. Mars, yogurt, both of them at 80 and 82%. And Mars is basically a soured milk that is mixed up and beaten up, and it is part of the staple diet of most of the population in South Africa. As you can see, 80% of the homes would have it. This goes very much with the maize porridge, and that is a staple food for most of those people. Yogurt, again, throughout the country is very high usage, and as you can see, 82.5, the highest, is available in most homes. So if you ever go to South Africa and you like yogurt, you'll be fine. Dairy farming in South Africa, again, just in a nutshell, 50% of the milk produced on farms in the Eastern or Western Cape, and 25% is produced in KwaZulu-Natal. So in other words, that 75% of the milk is basically produced along the coast, down from KwaZulu-Natal all the way down to the Western Cape. The average farm in the country produces about 3,700 liters of milk daily. 44% of dairy farms in the Eastern Cape have more than 500 cows, and KwaZulu-Natal 420. When I first started, that wouldn't have even been a fifth. It probably would have been around about 120 average. So as you can see, these herds have just got bigger and bigger and bigger. In these Eastern Cape and KwaZulu-Natal, these are the places I told you that were looking for cheaper ways to dairy farm. These are the places where they started with crossbreeding so that they could get a hardier kind of cow that would bring their costs down, where fertility would go higher, because obviously the quality of the food that was given was not always as good as it should be. So they needed to actually produce a cow that was easier to manage. And this has happened quite a lot in those two areas. Eastern Cape has very much followed a kind of a New Zealand system. They also don't get those severe winters, so they can really graze comfortably all year round. Obviously, ryegrass doesn't quite grow as fast during the winter months as it would during the summer months. But then you can actually see a little bit way down is that 40% of the milk is produced September, November, and the lowest April to July. So they do tend to sort of keep away from the winter months with high production, and the milk is produced more September to November. September in South Africa is obviously when our spring flush would come in. Number of people employed on dairy farms, is about 45,000. At least 100 cows are needed to be sustainable. So as I was explaining earlier, the guys that were milking 2 cows and 5 cows and just sort of supplying themselves and sort of people around them, that kind of dairy farming is slowly but surely disappearing, which is actually a great pity. The average walking distance of cows is about 1.5 kilometers one way. I suppose that's about a mile, but that's basically to the food and back. This again would vary substantially between areas, because obviously if you've got a complete feed system as compared to some of those pasture systems in those extensive areas, they're going to walk a lot further. I've been to farms where they would easily be walking 4 kilometers a day. 20% of pastures available are irrigated, and the calf mortality rate, for what it's worth, is 3%. That would obviously vary substantially between areas. The cost of production is stated at 4 Rand per litre, but this will vary extremely between regions. As I was saying, people have tried to find different ways of bringing down their costs so that they can actually make just a little bit more money. This basically works out to about 20p per litre. Average in 2019 for milk price was about 4.50 Rand to 5 Rand, which is about 26p. But farmers tell me it should be well over 5 Rand for them to actually be making substantial amounts of money, or at least sustainable amount of money. So it is, at the moment, it's very, very difficult to make money out of that. Then the future of dairy farming in South Africa. The number of dairy farmers in South Africa. In 1997, there were 50,000 farmers, but in 2017, there's only 1,600 left, which is obviously a worrying factor. When I grew up and when I started in the industry, you'd basically go in an area from farm to farm to farm, and everybody would be milking cows. Now there's very few left. And as you saw in the Eastern Cape and Natal, the herd sizes have just increased, and the rest of the country have just stopped producing milk. There are a few reasons. One of the reasons is last year, according to AfriForum, these aren't my figures, I just took them off AfriForum's page, 552 farm attacks occurred and 57 farm murders occurred in 2019. Obviously, this does cause a lot of negativity, and especially with dairy farming, where you're up early in the morning in the dark and you're back late in the night at dark. This also is the main attacks were in the center of the country, where there's more attacks than anywhere else. So obviously those are the areas that really just stopped having dairy farms. They just stopped dairy producing. Then obviously droughts, we were speaking about it in the center of the country, but we're also into the Eastern Cape and into areas where it was just, droughts cause huge amounts of loss of capital. When you've got to buy in feed, you've got to find feed, it's just impossible. And then, of course, the normal social and political pressure with changing rules, changing laws, etc., obviously has made it very difficult. And the cost of production is very high. If you're in the Western Cape area, you can't actually produce the feed you need to feed your cows. So everything has basically got to be imported from different areas. And that's just makes it mad. I mean, we know in the UK, if you can be self-sufficient and don't need to buy in food, what a huge difference it makes to your bottom line. Well, there in the Western Cape, they can almost produce nothing of what they need. Economical conditions have also been damaged by cheaper milk products being brought in from Europe. I've actually seen photos of shipments that have been brought in from other countries, and this obviously damages the dairy industry badly. However, on a positive note, the population still will need to work, and they'll still need to be fed. They'll still want mass. They will have to have production. They'll still want fresh milk. They'll still want cheese. That means we do definitely need people that are supplying fresh milk to the market. And obviously, the dairy industry in South Africa is vitally important to the survival of the South African people. So I still see it as a very, very positive role. I also see it as a positive role in the UK, because if we carry on with our dairy production in England, then at least we won't be taking food out of South Africa or any of those dairy products from there. We will have enough to actually supply ourselves. The economical conditions have actually improved. So the future does look a little bit brighter, I've read. And it does just show growth from 2021 to 2022. There are the indicators are showing that there will be growth. So hopefully that comes in. Obviously, in our changing world where everything has changed so dramatically, we don't really know where that would come from. The sources that I use are MPO, South Africa, Statistics South Africa, AfriForum, SA Hunting Industry, Fruit Market Reports, South African Beef Industry, and AFMA. And obviously the photographs were taken by Colleen, myself, and my baby brother, Craig. Thank you very much for joining us, and please feel free to ask questions. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for that, Neil, for a very interesting and informative talk, but I can't believe you've never tried crocodile. I certainly remember having crocodile vol au vents in the Northern Territory, and was always told that crocodile tastes however you feed it. So if you feed it beef, it will taste like beef, etc., etc. But anyway, starting the questions, thank you to everybody that's attended and for the questions that have now got. If you have any more, please do send them through. To open the questioning, how well does the government back agriculture in South Africa?
They don't back it very well. If I were to actually give a percentage of what they would be doing, but no, if I had to, again, one of the biggest difference between the UK agriculture and South Africa's agriculture is definitely the backing of the government. So what we get here with single farm payments and things like that doesn't actually exist in South Africa. You do get subsidies and you do get tax relief, obviously, because they employ a lot of people. So there's a lot of tax sort of, not dodging, but you can actually pay a lot less tax. But otherwise, no, there's not much support.
That's interesting, because I think a lot of people here would suggest or say that they don't back agriculture that much here compared to somewhere like, I don't know, Ireland or New Zealand or other parts of the world. But you're saying compared to South Africa, we're on a good thing.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you for that. Is there any other questions from anybody else attending? Thank you. Do many of the larger farms use robots in South Africa?
Very short answer to that is no. There are farms that use robots in South Africa, but it's not as big. I think if you put it into context, there's huge amounts of labor. So you know, to go into robot milking, which is obviously very expensive, would be almost a waste, because you have people living on your farm that are doing the work, so you wouldn't have to really worry about that. But there are robots in South Africa. The percentage of, I'm not actually even sure, but it's pretty low.
I'd say I'd probably back that up in the sense of, I remember having I think he's a Zimbabwean farmer visit when I was in North Queensland, and he was sort of astounded that we were doing it all ourselves. We just have, you know, we've got the locals doing all the labour. They do it all for us. So yeah, that probably, you say, the labour's relatively cheap in comparison, and
plenty of. So you know, you've got a lot of labour. So it's not even a question of what you're paying them. It's just there is a lot. And what I was saying earlier is that South African agriculture does tend to support a large amount of people, and that's part of it. Obviously, would be doing the work.
Yeah. My next question is, do you think the future of the 1,600 remaining the 1,600 remaining farms will reduce further, or will agriculture flourish again?
I can't see that it should increase dramatically because of the cost of production. But it's very similar to what we were talking about with England. Some of those farms, there's nothing much else you can do but dairy farm on them. So the grass that they grow in, that's kind of stuff you pretty much have to dairy farm. So no, I don't think it should decrease dramatically. So the people that are remaining will probably remain in it. I think it will probably reduce more and more and more to those two areas that I was speaking to you about, which is KwaZulu-Natal and the Eastern Cape, where they can produce milk cheaper. So those areas, have grown phenomenally since I've been in this industry. And the cow numbers have just increased, farmers have decreased. So obviously it's one farmer milking where 5 people used to. I think that'll carry on. I don't see that coming back. But what I said to you, mass is so important to the South African market. We have to be producing fresh milk in South Africa. You can't make mass out of pasteurized milk. It needs that bacteria. It's the same as yogurt. It needs to grow. It needs to, basically, you don't want it to go rotten. You want it to sour. So we do need fresh milk in South Africa. It doesn't matter what they do.
Thinking of that, you're talking about you need it for, obviously, for the processing, be it for Mars or whatever. Are there many large dairy farms processing their own milk?
There are a phenomenal amount of milk buyers in South Africa, and a lot of people do produce their own milk. A lot of them there's not that many making cheese, but a lot of them sell milk privately. Again, I wouldn't be sure of the percentage. I remember at Breed Society, I once worked out that there was something like 25 different milk buyers. So, and those were official milk buyers, not just sort of like a guy selling out of his back door.
A couple of questions about the cows now. What's the average number of lactations per Holstein cow in South Africa?
The average, it used to be not quite 2 in some of those herds. Milk recording to me wasn't quite as good as it should be. And I remember taking it as from NMR in the UK at one point to be 2.8. And I think in South Africa at that stage, it was only 1.8. The huge heat and stress that cows in South Africa have to live under makes fertility a huge problem. And so it's very difficult to actually breed cows and keep them going. So yeah, it's pretty low.
Okay. How many would classify in South Africa?
To be honest with you, it's a question that I could have answered exactly 12 years ago. Now it would be a little bit more difficult. There was about 110,000 registered cows. So in retrospect, that would mean, I think we were classifying around about 30 to 35,000 a year, of which at one point I was doing about 11,000 a year. So
yeah. What percentage would AI and what percentage would use herd bulls?
About 33% of South African cattle would be bred to own bulls, and the rest would be bred to AI. This has actually changed quite considerably in certain areas. And again, this would be very, very much area bound. I remember speaking to a colleague of mine in KwaZulu-Natal, and he didn't even know what a bull was on a farm. He said they might have a beef bull there, but they don't have Holstein bulls. Then down in the Western Cape, where I sort of spent most of my time, everybody had a bull because of the high milk production in the extreme heat. They were really struggling to get cows bred. So it does vary through the systems, but yeah, it's about 33% uses bulls, or are bred by bulls.
Following on from the robot question earlier, is technology playing a larger role in South African agriculture?
Yeah, technology has definitely improved. Possibly, again, not quite as fast as what the UK has, because firstly of costs, importation costs, the rand's value, etc. So it probably hasn't quite run as fast as what it would. But these dairy farms are very, very efficient farmers. So technology would play a big role.
Yeah. 2 very similar questions. Are there any health issues like TB, tuberculosis, BVD in South Africa? And are the Holsteins hardy enough to sustain in South Africa?
Yeah, excellent question. TB, we get individual cases of TB. It's more actual bird TB that they call. So that's actually doesn't actually affect us as badly. So we don't really have the problems even slightly to what we've got in the UK. So no, on TB, when in South Africa, if I heard of a case of TB, it used to be a horrible thing to even hear about. But so that's not really a problem. BVD, IBR, all of the others we do inoculate against. All of the other diseases are pretty much run. Yeah, and the great question is if whether the Holstein is hardy enough to be farmed in South Africa. One of my passions is for the Jersey breed, and one of the reasons is that they're better in the heat, and they can handle it better. The other thing that I spoke about earlier is that a lot of people use crossbreeding because they were going away from the Holsteins into these sort of pasture areas where they really did need a hardier and tougher animal. And just on that note, one of the most commonly used crosses is the Jersey onto the Holstein. So there's a lot of that kind of crossbreeding. Obviously, Fleckvier, Montbéliard, etc., Swedish Reds, Ayrshires, they are used in crosses, but the most popular is the Jersey cross.
What do you think UK farmers could learn from South Africa and vice versa?
Definitely, South Africa could learn from the UK about quality roughage. That's probably what they can learn. The one difference between cows in South Africa as compared to cows in the UK is that the UK cows have got better spring of rib. And I definitely believe this is caused by better quality roughage. The roughage in South Africa can be really rough. It can really be hard. So that's probably what they can learn. I'm not sure what we could learn in the UK from South Africa on the dairy industry is probably efficiency in a lot of things, because obviously they're under a lot more pressure. So efficiency would be one that we might be able to learn a little bit from them. I mean, seriously, it's tough to dairy farm in South Africa. That's not saying it's not tough to dairy farm in the UK, but there are a lot of stresses, and so I suppose efficiency maybe.
Efficiency, yeah.
But not much though. I'd hate to say that I can, when I go around on the UK farms, that I'd be able to tell them how they could improve according to South Africa.
Is the vegan and environmental movement impacting South Africa in the way it is here in the UK and Europe?
No, but it definitely does impact them. I think, because if any South African heard me say no, it doesn't impact them, I'd get rocks thrown at me. You definitely are impacted by it. But one of the things is that from a rural point of view, people do like their animals. Maas, which is that milk product I said, that people love eating beef and meat in South Africa. 60% of the meat is chicken. So it really does impact them, but it doesn't quite impact them as hard. Again, and this might be something to sort of think about in the areas where there's sufficient everything, water, food, money, etc. Obviously, veganism and them are impacting. In the areas where survival is your only concern, I can assure you veganism and anything else doesn't affect. So it does come back to sort of wealthier. It's a wealthy sort of problem, that it's wealth that would cause the problems.
Saying that in terms of sustainability, obviously we mentioned high levels of labour on farm already. Yep. What are the wages of the labour on farm?
Generally very good. As like in the UK, there is a minimum wage that you have to pay. On a farm, that it's always been quite difficult, because what happened on a lot of farms is that you were given, for an example, X amount of money a month and then a bag of maize, which was basically to feed the family. And so then you sort of divided it up. For instance, if there was social problems like drinking or not looking after the money properly, you knew that you were feeding the people. But this sort of became very unpopular, and agriculture was told to pay everybody the amount and then they could buy the maize back. So farmers would basically pay somebody sufficient according to the limits, and a lot of the time over it, because if you've got somebody that's good, you're going to be paying him more. And then what farmers do tend to do in South Africa is that they do a lot more for the people that work for them than anywhere else that I've been. One of the things that Thabo and Becky brought in very many years ago was a sort of a 5-point system where farms were measured by what they were actually achieving for the people that worked for them. So for instance, taking them to a football match would count, taking them to the doctor, taking them to the shops, or feeding them, buying stuff for them from the shops and things like that. So I would say that the labor force in agriculture in South Africa is really well looked after.
Okay. And would you ever be tempted to go back and work with cows again in South Africa?
No, I wouldn't. No, there's nothing wrong with it. It's certainly an industry that's still carrying on very well. There's a lot of people that still work there very happily, and I've got a lot of friends and ex-colleagues that are doing very well there. I think there's a lot more to that question. That would mean going back to South Africa, where we were not particularly happy with the political situation. My wife was not particularly happy with it, and I didn't actually see a future for my children, more than not seeing a future for myself. So I still think if somebody decided to go and work with cattle in South Africa, I certainly would recommend it. Africa is really a country for young people. It's a lovely place to live, and you can see by the way that I grew up that it was utopia, but it's not. It wouldn't be utopia for me anymore now. So,
well, that concludes all the questions we've had, Neil. So I'd like to thank yourself for your presentation again and for answering these questions. I'd like to thank everybody for attending, and obviously for the questions they've put to you as well as listening to you. This webinar has been recorded, so we're hoping to get it up online for anybody that wants to view it again. But otherwise, any questions, please don't hesitate to contact one of the three of us, and even if it's for a direct question to somebody else, and follow things, and we can follow things up for you. But otherwise, I'd like to thank everybody for their attendance, and just remind everyone that the next meeting in this series is a fortnight's time. So that's Thursday the 28th, starting again at 12:30 GMT, and it will be Mark Yearsley talking about his time dairying in the Sudan. Any last comments from yourself, Neil, before we finish?
No, it's been great. Thank you to everybody that listened, and thank you for the questions.
No worries. Well, thank you very much, everybody. We look forward to seeing you all soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.